This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hybrid Cloud Show, episode 38. I'm Joe.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers, although you're my employer, dear listener. So we've got no Aaron, he's away, so you're stuck with me, I'm afraid, this time. But he'll be back next episode, all being well. Seeing as I'm here, I thought I would abuse my position and get some advice from you lot. I'm something of a half admin. You may know me from 2.5 Admins, for example. But all of my servers are very much pets. I don't do any sort of automation. I'm SSHing in, running updates manually, obviously unattended upgrades, but I'm installing things, treating them like my babies, like I really shouldn't. Listening to the last 37 episodes of this show makes me want to move more in the direction and more of a mindset that you lot have, but I'm just not sure how to do that. I know I should be looking at infrastructure as code and automation, but how? Give me some practical tips.
So I have a question, Joe. What's something you do on your servers every week that is a pain in the ass and takes you way longer than you think it ought to? You said updates. I think that is always a good place to start. If you can take the pain of running apt update, apt upgrade, and reboot at scale across the 5 servers you have in your home lab, that might save you half an hour a week. And that's probably a worthwhile thing to look at automating.
Right, but when I do that, when it's time to reboot once a month roughly, I like to be there to make sure it comes back.
You can be there. You can automate the upgrade and reboot process, wait for the box to come up, and then run some kind of health check and spit that out to standard out and have that appear in your terminal. But you're only running, say, a single Ansible playbook in that case, rather than SSHing into 5 different servers in 5 different windows on your XFCE desktop that may or may not support 5 windows at a time.
Yes, it does. Come on.
Better yet, why don't you start with monitoring and uptime monitoring? And then you can know that on a certain time, on a certain schedule, your update's going to run. And then you can just get notified if, for whatever reason, the updates fail and the thing doesn't come back alive. You'll know about that. And you still save a lot of time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I guess my point is find something that really annoys you that you have to do many times every week and find a way to automate that and make the problem go away so you don't have to think about it.
I think that is probably what has put me off using Docker in production. I've messed around with Docker, but I don't fully understand the best practices when it comes to updating the containers or, replacing the containers. Presumably that is something that is, that's what you do in cloud, right? That the whole thing is automating containers.
Yeah, at the cloud scale with an application that is some proprietary thing you've built internally, it's a slightly different ballgame, right? Because you're managing the release cadence of that. You know what the tags are. You know when the tags change. Whereas for running your Jellyfin server, for example, that's a little bit different because they could do a release tomorrow. They then might not do another release for 3 weeks' time. And then they might do 4 in a day after that. And that's really what you've got to keep on top of if you're running this stuff in a home lab versus having some kind of pipeline which is going to go and say, a new container's been built, it's passed its checks in dev, now we want to push it to prod.
So how do I do that in a home lab situation then? And don't say Kubernetes, Sean. Please don't say Kubernetes.
Beat me to it. No, there are, half Kubernetes.
Can't help yourself.
I really like having my infrastructure as code. And that's not just Kubernetes, but it's also my Docker Compose files, things that I know that I can see and control the versions right there in Git, right? So this is almost like Git ops. That's how I like to start. For example, I think you're looking at working with Image, right?
Yeah.
Image has a Docker Compose that you could just copy, put into a Git repo, and then anytime you want to make a change to it or a new update comes out, you can just bring that in and pull it to your machine and then do Docker up and you're done. But one of the benefits of using the cloud to do this for you is that there are tools that can monitor updates and package versions and Docker versions and all that stuff for you. The ones that are really big are Dependabot if you're on GitHub, or Renovate if you're on GitHub or any other platform. And what I really like is that Renovate will not only tell you there's a change, but it also create an MR with the changes already on a branch to your repo. It'll create a merge request for you to say, hey, this is here. And then it'll also pull the release notes saying, and this is what's changing. And then all you do is get a notification every once in a while saying, hey, this is here, and you can merge it on your own time.
All right, let me ask a basic question then. Do I actually need to learn Git properly for this?
I don't think so. I think while what Sean's describing is excellent second step, I would nearly have a Docker Compose file sitting on a server and you just do a Docker Compose apply and then edit that file when you need to make changes. The awesome thing about Docker and Docker Compose is like containers are great. And I think one of the examples I was thinking of while you were describing your problem was like, what is a real headache when you're self-hosting and just on bare metal? And I think the headache is like, managing multiple versions of Python where you've got a bunch of applications running all with different versions of Python and you're trying to do an apt-get update on that host. Like that for me is like keeps me awake at night. What Docker can do is like isolate all the dependencies into one place. But the nice thing for you is you've just got one file that describes what your box is doing. And usually Jellyfin and other tools like it will have this nice abstraction. So all you'll see is this one big Docker Compose file with everything you're running on the box, we'll say, to start with. And you've got your Jellyfin and you got your exact configuration you care about and nothing else. All the defaults are the same. And so like if you think about that administrative experience versus, I don't know, when I shell onto a box, okay, wait, hang on, what file am I editing in etc here to do this thing? I don't need to navigate around. All the things I'm running and all the configuration explicitly is in one place only. And that's quite nice. Later, you can then push that file to Git and just use it as a version backup. But even in the immediate, I see Docker Compose as a big win.
Yeah, for me, that was the big appeal of moving all of the applications to Docker, was that all of my data for those applications is just in a bind mount. And I can have this single Docker Compose file in a folder with all of the directories with the application data bind mounted into the container. And if I want to back that up, I do a Docker Compose down, I tar it up, and I rsync it off somewhere. And even though all of the applications sit on ZFS, I still have a cron job once a week, which stops the container, tars it up, and then rsyncs it off somewhere. And that is just a single contained application with everything it needs to run in a tar file. And if I want to spin it up somewhere else, I just untar it, I do a Docker Compose up, and that's it.
And am I right in thinking that you can have multiple containers in your Docker Compose file?
Absolutely. That's kind of the whole entire point of Compose, is that not just I need my application, but I need my database or I need whatever other dependency. Docker Compose just brings it all in one place for you.
So if you take Nextcloud for an example, right, you might need the Nextcloud container itself running the PHP application. You need a Postgres database and you need some kind of SMTP relay. And I have that all in a single Compose file. In that Compose file, it gets its own network created so that then when I do Docker Compose up, I have my Nextcloud PHP in one container. I have a Postgres instance in another container and I have an SMTP relay. And my Nextcloud server does not know anything exists outside of that. It references the SMTP via just the hostname SMTP. It references the Postgres by the hostname Nextcloud Postgres, because that's what the container's called. And when I want to back that up, I take it down, I tar it up, I put it somewhere, and all of the data I need to run Nextcloud is there. And if I want to upgrade it, all I do is I look at that Docker Compose file, I say that Nextcloud 22.3 or whatever version has been released, I update the tag that I'm pulling, and I do a Docker Compose restart, and that's it. That's all I have to do to get that instance updated.
Is there no option to just say, Nextcloud latest?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. If you want a little bit less control and you just want the applications to update automatically, like in your example of Jellyfin, where it might be public facing, then sure, you probably want to do that. And you probably want to have some kind of cron job running, which is definitely not what I do. It looks through the folder that all of my containers are in. It looks for each Compose file and it does a Docker Compose update and a Docker Compose restart, which then just pulls the latest for all of the containers which are using the latest tag.
Yeah, because that's what I would like to do. Even though it's not public facing, I still want to just get the latest versions of stuff. Like say I had Nextcloud, Image, and Jellyfin. I'd just like them all to stay up to date automatically if possible.
For Jellyfin and Image, you can absolutely do that. I might caution you against doing Nextcloud for that. Instead, what I would do is I'd use a specific version, but like a major version. So instead of saying I want 23.3, actually, I don't even know what the current version is. I think it's like 31.0.0. You can just say get Nextcloud -31. And then any minor version that comes after that, you'll get automatically upgraded, but it won't force you up to 32 until you're ready. And because there are breaking changes from Nextcloud.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I want security updates, bug fixes, not necessarily major versions. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you want to iterate to the next major version, you go into your compose file. After taking a backup, you change that 31 to 32 or 32 to 33, and you do a Docker Compose pull. You do a Docker Compose down, you do a Docker Compose up, you look at the logs and see if anything funky is happening, and it probably isn't, and then you're good to go. And you just have your cron job running, which will iterate through the Compose YAML files and do the Docker pull every day beyond that. I mean, that's effectively the setup that I've been running for years at this point, with very few issues other than like in Image, for example, where in the early days there were a lot of breaking changes between versions, and that screwed me over a few times. But again, I went back, I read the docs, realized that an update had probably happened, and went and changed the things I needed to change.
Is this it? Is this the episode where we finally convinced Joe to try Docker?
I'm just hoping that he stops bugging me about getting his Jellyfin server running. He's been doing for the last 3 years.
I think you will find that Jellyfin is running fine, and since I got Direct Play working on Fire Sticks, I don't have to worry about hardware acceleration, and I just installed it on the Metal like a caveman.
Just to go back to your original question, Joe, about pets versus cattle, the reason we're all advocating for Docker and Docker Compose and containers, like we gave lots of good reasons, but the other thing as well is, if you actually want your servers to be something that's like, I can just tear these apart and like very quickly get back up to speed. We could talk about Ansible, or some other thing you might use to provision your services on your machines. All Ansible needs to do now is just shell on, install Docker and Docker Compose, and then you're done. Like that's your infrastructure as code, and then you're basically orchestrating applications at that point. So I think like the benefit there is like, yeah, your boxes really are ephemeral. Like, and as Gary says, like you've got your Docker Compose file, you've got your data folder, which could be a subfolder. So you've got, rather than your entire operating system and all these patches you need to worry about, it's literally one folder, one file, back it all up. That's it, done. You reproduce everything onto a new machine with literally Docker and Docker Compose installed later on. So you just abstract everything to something very manageable.
Yeah, and like I said, that's been the way that I've been running my home infrastructure for a really long time, is that everything is Docker and Docker Compose. The host has a minimal set of about 10 packages installed on it that are orchestrated through Ansible. When I build a new machine, I just mount the NFS directory that the Docker Compose files are in. And again, I could do that through Ansible if I really wanted to. And then I just run Docker Compose up, and that's all of my applications up and running on a new machine. It means that I can switch from an old Ubuntu release to the latest LTS or the latest interim within about 10 minutes. It's actually really nice.
This episode is sponsored by Insta360, which you may know for its 360 and action cameras. They've recently launched their new pocket camera, the Go Ultra. This tiny camera, about the size of an Oreo and weighing just 53 grams, is a game changer for creators on the go. You can throw it in your pocket, but it's powerful enough to shoot super smooth 4K 60 FPS. The built-in magnetic mounting system lets you clip it to your hat or other clothing for effortless point-of-view shots, or attach it to anything you can stick a magnet to for interesting angles without extra mounts. The camera has an upgraded 1/1.28-inch sensor and is IPX8 waterproof up to 33 feet. The Go Ultra's next-gen stacked polymer battery delivers super fast charging and ultra-long runtime, 70 minutes plus 200 minutes with the Action Pod, and fast charging to 80% in just 12 minutes. The Action Pod also lets you remotely control the standalone camera, and you can use Apple Find My to track it down if you lose it. You can't stick to everything out there with a magnet, so if you want to grab yourself some free sticky tabs and attach your camera to anything you can think of, go to store.insta360.com and use the promo code HYBRIDCLOUD for your Insta360 Go Ultra purchase. Available for the first 30 purchases only. Something that I've noticed is a difference between my mindset and yours, Gary, certainly, is you seem to be quite heavily into ClickOps, I think you call it. Like, for example, you are all about Proxmox. Is that something that I should be thinking about doing, like more abstraction?
Oh man, you've outed me on the air. I never thought the day would come. So for me, it's about the trade-off between convenience versus doing things the right way. Am I capable of spinning up KVM on a Linux box, setting a couple of ZFS pools up, and running the VMs there? Sure. Do I want to be managing that level of the infrastructure? Absolutely not. So for me, it comes down to where do I want to put my focus in terms of what I'm doing in the homelab. Proxmox is a project with, I don't know, a bit of a mixed history, but for me, it's always been a solid Debian-based hypervisor that, yes, has a nice UI that I can use, but it's also a pretty stable, predictable platform that I can target to run VMs on. And again, it's about community support for me. If I have a problem with what that hypervisor is doing, pretty much every Proxmox host in the world is going to be built in the same way, and there's going to be an answer out there for it. In terms of ClickOps, I don't know. I don't think it's fair to say that I prefer ClickOps, but I certainly prefer things that take the pain out of managing bits of the stack that perhaps I'm not so bothered about automating.
Can I also out you as a TrueNAS user then?
Sure, yeah, why not? While we're at it, just start throwing all of the grenades my way.
Is that just the difference between your home lab and work then? Is it just because you want to do things differently at home?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, right, that I only have so much time in a week to manage and play with my home lab. When I was younger, I had every evening free to play with and iterate on this stuff, and I'd be swapping out what was doing the storage every other week, or changing the hypervisor I was using, or playing with something new. Now I'm married, I've got 2 kids, and I'm lucky if I have 2 hours a week to play with this stuff. And for the important bits, I just want something predictable, and that's why TrueNAS works for me. I probably could have set up on a box Ubuntu with ZFS, with SMB, exported some NFS shares, automated the updates, but if that breaks, I do not have the time to unpick it.
Who doesn't want to be debugging Kubernetes pods on Christmas Day while Miracle on 31st Street isn't isn't playing on Jellyfin?
Again, Shane, this sounds like work. I think this is my problem, right? Is that I've been burned enough times spending until 4 a.m. in some junior engineer's flat rebuilding a Kubernetes cluster because something is broken that I'm just not interested in that anymore. As much thanks as that particular weekend got me from the CTO, and they paid for us to have a curry and pizza and stuff, I just don't want to be doing that. I'm done with staying up until 5 a.m. debugging some janky hand crank thing that I've built.
But what about this idea of abstraction? Isn't that part of why you do it, Gary? Because you want to abstract things where you can?
Well, I want someone else to do the abstraction where they can, right? So if I'm running Proxmox or TrueNAS, the building of the KVM piece or setting up LXD and LXC on a box is not something that I'm particularly interested in doing, but I am interested in running the workloads on top of that and having an API that I can target. And as much as we talked about the Proxmox Terraform stuff being terrible, the whole reason that that exists is because there is a relatively stable API sitting in Proxmox, for example. So that kind of stuff I just wouldn't be able to build or do myself is the reality, not without a lot of hand cranking. I want all of that kind of base layer stuff taken away and to be someone else's problem so that I can focus on doing the things that I care about, which at this point isn't setting up a KVM server or running a storage server and doing all of the performance tweaks that I might need to do that are just done out of the box in TrueNAS.
But Sean, you don't do that kind of thing, right?
It's funny you asked that, Joe. I do the exact same thing. I am also a Proxmox user who is running Kubernetes on the Proxmox cluster of my ridiculous servers. But for some of my pods, my data is mounted over NFS into my TrueNAS server. And TrueNAS is set up with all its data sets and everything just like Gary does. And it's for the exact same reason. I got 3 kids and no time, and I can't afford to be messing with NVIDIA drivers for my NVIDIA 1070 that sits in my TrueNAS server where Plex transcodes. I don't want to think about that. It's done out of the box. I just had to check a box in TrueNAS.
Yeah, there's certain stuff that I want to just work, right? And the hypervisor and storage layer are something that I want to just work because I don't have an infinite number of boxes at home. I don't have a Play storage server and a Play hypervisor that I could go and install whatever I wanted on. Things like Jellyfin and Plex need to be online. If not, my kid screams at me because he can't watch Fireman Sam when he goes to bed. That is just the reality of my life now. And I think that's where, we talked before about having a separation between home dev and home prod. For me, that separation is a separate set of VMs that I get to play with. I was spinning up a pretty beefy VM for work just today because I wanted to play with some stuff. And had I not had a rock solid platform that I could just throw the VM on top of and not have to worry about how I'm hand cranking the backups for it, for example, then that would have been much harder and wouldn't have been something that I'd been able to achieve in the 30 minutes I had between meetings and waking my kid up from his nap.
Fair enough. Well, it seems like Docker Compose is where I need to start with all of this then. So that's first on my agenda. I've got some time to myself coming up soon. So I'll promise I'll at least try and get my head around Docker Compose.
If you can get a Jellyfin server with transcoding and image set up, then I will owe you a cider at some point.
Okay, sounds like a challenge. Stefan, who's a patron, wrote to us with a question. Stefan says, I'm a senior Python developer who would like to switch to a DevOps career in the future. I'm also a home labber. I have, among other smaller boxes, a home server which runs a few services in Docker and a few others in LXC containers under LXD. I also use it as a NAS with ZFS pools storing the data. How can I improve my home lab in such a way that I can showcase it and use it in a DevOps recruitment process? In other words, what can I do that will benefit both me and be useful to find a job?
So I think you already have a pretty good foundation in terms of breadth of technologies and experience with running those technologies for home lab / home prod to at least start building on it. So if I were you, I'd start thinking about things like, how would I scale this? How would I make it more resilient? How would I run those containers across a multitude of hosts? Maybe that's Kubernetes, maybe that's something else. How do I make this a little bit more like the cloud might be? Because that's likely where you're going to be orchestrating the majority of workloads in a DevOps career.
Like Gary said, I think you're already well on your way. I think there are some couple trade tools like Terraform and Ansible that I think you should probably have some examples of you using. It's tough because if you use Terraform locally, it's most likely going to be with something like Proxmox. And I'll just tell you straight up, the providers out there are lacking for Terraform on Proxmox. I'd recommend using Terraform with one of the other cloud providers and just trying to use some of your free tier credits towards using and learning Terraform versus trying to cobble something together at home.
Yeah, I think getting used to the basic kind of principles of Terraform, like the way that state works, the way that making different changes might affect the state of resources, whether it destroys them, whether it doesn't modify, all that kind of stuff is probably the most valuable part. And you can absolutely do that on one of the cloud providers' free tiers. Equally, if you're just understanding the logic of it, you could even use one of the smaller providers like a Dio or a Linode or something like that. That's the real important part for me with Terraform is how do you structure the repository? How do you make sure you're managing state correctly? And then what do different things do in terms of create, modify, update, delete?
I think having done about 1 million interviews and about 1 billion CV reviews in the last couple of months, I would agree with everything Gary and Sean have said, but I would add, have fun with it in that if you come to an interview and speak with some enthusiasm about whatever you've learned, that will always be somewhat infectious and kind of puts you outside the crowd, even if it's relatively immature what you're working on. I solved this problem because I wanted to learn it, or I read about this technology and wanted to apply it and try it. And you start to demonstrate and talk a little about what Gary's mentioned around cloud architecture and scaling a little, that sort of enthusiasm and that learning mindset, as I say, is really infectious and really fun to hear when you're, as I say, in interview 500,000 of 1 million you have to do. So yeah, have fun and keep learning and show that learning.
What about documenting things, blog posts, GitHub, that sort of thing?
Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. Actually, I was going to say it's quite a nice thing. Like if you think about the CV reviewers or the hiring managers, like they'll be looking at CVs before you can even talk about something. So if you've got like, as your story explains, you want to move from engineer to more DevOps, write up a blog series about here. I'm trying to get more into DevOps. Here's the things I'm learning, and maybe it's worth sharing. And if you come up with anything interesting in a novel, like capture all those and share them. Like it just means that you're showing your enthusiasm at that earlier stage in the hiring pipeline, which is always a good shout.
And I think the other thing that's really important is that there's a real lack of decent developer skills among a lot of DevOps engineers. I think it's probably still fair to say that a lot of DevOps people come from an infrastructure background, and therefore they really understand networking, compute, scaling, resiliency, all of that stuff. But they probably don't understand things like Python or Go as much as you might. So if you are coming from that development background, maybe find a way to showcase those skills in a way that you think would be applicable to DevOps as well. For me, I really hate dealing with things like build pipelines and stuff like that. If you can show a way that you can use the skills that you have to automate building out an application or something like that, then absolutely go for it. I think that is just as important as cloud architecture.
Especially around shipping your applications. I find that to be a place that a lot of people lack. They either are really good at like the CI/CD, or they're really good at like the infrastructure, but actually shipping the application, creating either a Docker or a Snap or whatever it is you're going to do, and then knowing how to tune the infrastructure is going to run on so it can serve your application the best way. So if you have like a Java app, like, how do I spin it up really quickly? How do I manage more than one JVM? Those kinds of things are all areas that I've seen the more ops side struggle with, that DevOps can really come through in clutch.
Oh man, don't talk to me about tuning Spring Boot parameters and stuff. Like, that is just hell. And every time I've needed to do it, I've ended up tapping a friendly developer on the shoulder and jumping in a Slack huddle to work it out.
And that's going to be Stefan.
Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. Before we do, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. And thank you to everyone who's written to us, show@hybridcloudshow.com, with your questions and comments. Keep them coming. They'll all be back in 2 weeks with Aaron, hopefully. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.